Close your eyes and picture a poor person. Describe what you see. Suppose you asked your students, how would you expect them to respond? It's easy to predict that they would have different pictures, and it's perhaps not surprising that most of their mental portraits reflect distinctly American stereotypes. Panhandlers on street intersections, raggedy clothing, dilapidated housing. Given the diverse images we associate with the word, it's important that any consideration of the economics of poverty begins with the creation of a common vocabulary. And that's the purpose of the 3 activities associated with Lesson 1. The first 2 activities, What is Poverty? A KWL exercise, and WebQuest, What is Poverty and Who are the Poor, are designed to help students build a working definition of poverty. These 2 activities are the subject of this video. The third activity, Will the Real Capitalism Please Stand Up?, also a vocabulary building exercise, is the subject of the next video on the DVD. KWL, which stands for Know, Want to Know, and Learned, is a widely used technique for framing lessons in elementary classrooms. While we wouldn't recommend telling high school students that you're taking them back to grade school, we do recommend the pedagogy as an excellent vehicle for eliciting students' perceptions and conceptions of poverty. It's important to let students know that there are no right or wrong answers in a KWL exercise. The purpose is just to articulate our common knowledge, or what we might call walking around knowledge, and to think about where that knowledge came from. Later, we'll evaluate what we thought we knew. What about these over here? There are many ways to conduct the KWL exercise. One is to simply hold a large group discussion using the blackboard, an overhead transparency, or poster-sized paper to record students' responses. First to the What do we know about world poverty chart, and then to the What do you want to know chart. KWL is highly adaptable, however, and need not be restricted to just recording lists of responses. Be creative in designing other ways to allow students to articulate what they think they know about poverty in the world. The option shown on the video, the DOTS activity, gets students out of their seats and more actively involved. To prepare for the activity, create a set of question sheets directing students to place dots on a world map to reveal their general awareness of the magnitude and location of impoverished populations. Note that it works well to state the directions as place a blank dot on whatever you're looking for, the 3 poorest countries of the world, for example. If you then laminate the direction sheets, it's easy to stick different colored dots in the question blanks. Post 2 or 3 large world maps and tally sheets to record survey responses on the classroom wall. One caution, the map you'll see in the video is a landform map, but a political map makes it easier for students to find the countries they're looking for. Spacing the maps and surveys around the room ensures that more students stay engaged and that the task proceeds quickly. Distribute the question sheets so that students work individually or in small cooperative groups. Distribute dots or make them available in piles near the maps and surveys. Then stand back and allow students time to complete the task. This activity really has 3 goals. 1, it prompts students to begin thinking and hopefully wondering about world poverty. 2, it's the first step in building a common conceptual understanding of poverty, which is key to the success of subsequent lessons. And 3, it helps to develop students' skills in interpreting statistical data. When the dots are placed and students have returned to their seats, conduct a classroom discussion on what we think we know about world poverty. All right, tell me about some of the things that you did. So I want to know why you put things where you did. So tell me about all of those orange dots that are kind of grouped in there. What is that? China and Japan, okay. The data provided in the background outline for Lesson 1 and the included update links offer an overview of world poverty with plenty of maps, charts, and tables to make you comfortable conducting this discussion. Allow students to share their walking around knowledge about poverty. China and Japan, okay, and you thought that those were the 2 areas in which poverty has decreased the most. Okay, why did we think that? Asking those who speak to identify the sources of their knowledge encourages others to participate by removing the potential embarrassment of saying something that might not be true. Okay, and how did you know that?
We've talked about it in class before.
Okay, talked about it in class, all right. Okay, go ahead, Glenn.
And along with, like Christine said, opening up the free trade with the advancements.
The next step is to move toward a working definition by presenting students some of the data commonly used by researchers and policymakers. Lesson 1 includes a variety of overheads that can be downloaded from the CD. Begin with the World Bank definition, based on per capita income. Acknowledge that there are many indicators of poverty, but interestingly, per capita income turns out to be a good proxy for all of them. Even social indicators like access to clean drinking water, life expectancy, or infant mortality. Because it's relatively easy to measure, per capita income, currently less than $1 per person per day, is the accepted measure of world poverty. Materials in Lesson 1 also allow you to introduce students to other concepts in poverty studies, like the distinction between income and wealth, or income versus consumption measures of GDP, or income distribution, or most importantly for the lessons in this unit, the distinction between absolute and relative poverty, a distinction that separates poverty in the United States and much of Europe from poverty in the rest of the world. So when we talk about poverty in the United States and we talk about poverty in the world, we're talking about two astronomically different things. And I don't want to dismiss poverty in the United States and suggest that it's not a problem. But what we're going to talk about today and the activities that we're going to do are specifically targeted towards world poverty, or what we're going to call absolute poverty. What the United States has is usually referred to as relative poverty. The people who are poor in the United States are poor relative to the majority of Americans. But if you compared them to the majority of people in the world, they are relatively wealthy. Use the survey questions to begin to challenge some widely held misconceptions about poverty. Now, here's the other interesting thing, is that since 1980, the number of extremely poor people in the world has declined by 200 million. All right? So that was the problem that you were facing here, was trying to figure out. And I heard some great discussions here where people were saying, well, that if the percentage of poor people declines but the world population is growing, you could still end up with more poor people. And that's true. All right? And that has actually been the case for most of the history of civilization. Right? So starting in about 1750, as the Industrial Revolution gets going, and by the late 1800s, we begin to see declines in the percentage of the world that is poor. But in 1980, for the first time, the number of people who are poor in the world has declined. And that's a pretty amazing thing. And I don't think it's something that most people realize. I mean, our perception is that poverty in the world is growing and continues to grow. But what has actually happened is that the number of poor people has declined. Most students think that growing world population means increasing numbers of poor people. And for most of human history, that's been the case. However, the last quarter of the 20th century ushered in a welcome new era, a decline of not only the percentage of world population that is impoverished, but of the actual number of poor people. An amazing change in the history of man. Awareness of this change, this decline in the numbers of the poor, sets up the focus of the remaining lessons in Is Capitalism Good for the Poor? Why is poverty declining? How is this happening? The connection to capitalism can be made by showing students a series of graphs created by the Fraser Institute, comparing the status of the poor to the wealth of a country as a whole. If we divide the countries in the world into quintiles, from richest to poorest, we aren't surprised that poor people in the richest countries, the dark green bar, have much higher average incomes than poor people in the poorest countries, the red bar. We may be surprised, however, to find out that if we look at the percentage of a nation's income that goes to the poorest 10% of the population, there is very little difference from rich countries to poor countries. The point is clearly that if you're only going to get 2.5% of national income, it's better to get 2.5% of a big amount than it is to get 2.5% of a small amount. Another way to think of this is to use the slice of the pie analogy. And this leads us to economic growth. The key to reducing poverty is not to find a different way to cut a small pie, that is, to redistribute wealth. Instead, the key is to make a bigger pie. When students grasp this reality, they're ready to consider how best to grow the pie. The second activity in Lesson 1 is the Poverty WebQuest. Students continue to refine their mental picture of world poverty by collecting data from a variety of internet sources. And they gain more practice in interpreting statistical data. The WebQuest can be downloaded from the CD as a student handout. It is also available online as a permanent part of the FTE Capitalism website. Direct links to a variety of sources make it easier for students to jump into the investigation. The end product of the WebQuest requires students to demonstrate their skills in collecting, analyzing, and generalizing from statistical data. After students have completed the DOTS activity in the WebQuest, you may wish to use the "What have we learned" portion of the KWL charts as a tool to articulate a consensus definition of world poverty, a consensus that will facilitate class discussions as you continue to explore the question of whether capitalism can help the poor.